So I'm part of a Facebook group called the Literary James Bond, and recently somebody posted a section from this book, the new James Bond book on His Majesty's Secret Service by Charlie Higson, saying that it was woke. And a lot of people in the comments there added that they thought it was woke as well, which is interesting. Woke, everyone's going on about woke these days. But I remember when I was reading this, I did make a mental note of some of the political things that got said in it. And I thought it'd be kind of an interesting thing to talk about, the politics on His Majesty's Secret Service. Is it political? Is it woke? What's going on with this book? Let's spend a couple of minutes and have a chat about it. Stay tuned. Hi guys, it's me. I have no idea if the sound on this video is going to be watchable, but hopefully it will be. It's a bit windy out here. Anyway, we're here to talk about On His Majesty's Secret Service by Charlie Higson, which is the latest James Bond book. Yeah, I'm part of a Facebook group called the Literary James Bond, and someone had highlighted a section of the book and kind of made a comment about it being woke, which I thought was kind of interesting, because I do remember when I read this book, there were certain sections of it where Charlie Higson sort of explains what's going on through Bond's mental apparatus. And I remember thinking as I was reading it, oh, he's laying it on a bit thick. I have to admit, a couple of pages later, I got over that and stopped worrying about it. But it's definitely interesting because Charlie Higson unavoidably or intentionally gets a little political in this book. I mean, there's not even necessarily political, but very much brings his viewpoint of the world as it is now into the book. And I find it kind of interesting. One particular thing, because I say it's not political, there's a character in this book called Canna Tate, who is Canna Lyle, that's it, who's so obviously, clearly based on Andrew Tate, who is the very controversial, I don't know what he does, men's rights things, and everyone's accusing him of sex trafficking, and I don't know, I've seen videos of him, he looks like a bit of a dickhead, if I'm honest, but I'm not really particularly motivated by thoughts of him one way or another. I kind of enjoyed how there was a character based on him here, because I was like, oh, he's based this character on Andrew Tate, and look at that, his last name's Lyle, like Tate and Lyle. Isn't that funny and isn't that clever? The irony is that Canna Lyle in this book is much more of a badass than the real Andrew Tate. I mean, I think he's South African, which... Ooh, long-running, consistent anti-South Africanism in James Bond. It's delightful. I mean, probably not. I have South African friends, I shouldn't say that. But in the Bond films and the Bond books, there are all these sections about how terrible South Africans are, which I always find very, very amusing when I stumble across them. And Charlie Higson is continuing that tradition, because, yes, Canna Lyle, I believe, is a South African character. And he's like an actual, Special Forces guy who happens to also be an MMA fighter, whereas Andrew Tate is an MMA fighter, or a kickboxer or something like that. I don't know. I digress. That was an interesting thing, though, and I do know that Charlie Higson's view of Andrew Tate is kind of very much like the people who don't like him view, and I couldn't give a shit about him, but I am aware of people who actually give Andrew Tate some time of day, because some of the things that he said resonated with them, and some of the stuff going on with him getting prosecuted doesn't quite seem on the level. So there are people who I actually like and respect who would actually have that viewpoint rankle them, which is interesting. It's very difficult when you have groups of friends who have very different views on things, and sometimes you have to compartmentalize so you can be friends with different viewpoints, because there are certain parts of them that you love, and there are certain parts of them that might cause problems with other friends that you have, so you kind of don't focus on those bits. But it was interesting to me that the inclusion of a character like that, and later on when Charlie Higson starts talking about, right-wing figures, and I think he mentions Donald Trump by name, I can't remember, and how they're radicalizing young men and stuff like that. I do remember that bit kind of rankling me because I was like, okay, I get it. This is very much the viewpoint of a kind of left-wing, upper middle class British person, which is what Charlie Higson is. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, half my friends are kind of left-leaning, upper middle class British people. To me, it's interesting because his viewpoint seemed so narrow when he's talking about these things, and that's because he's got feelings about figures like Donald Trump and Andrew Tate, and I completely respect that. And his feelings are based on his viewpoint and his understanding and his awareness of these people in the context of being an upper middle class British guy who's slightly left wing, who learns about these people from like the Guardian and BBC and stuff like that, which is fine. But his viewpoint is one particular viewpoint. Whereas for me, living in America, interacting with Americans every day, seeing things from a different perspective, when people talk about Donald Trump, I can understand why so many people liked Donald Trump in America. If you live in America and you are faced with the American political system and you can observe the problems that exist in America, you can understand why a man like Donald Trump would actually appeal to certain people. And once again, I have friends who I respect, who I like, who are passionate, diehard Trump supporters. I have many friends who aren't, who absolutely hate his guts. It's really difficult to have two polar opposite groups of friends. Funny thing is, all my friends who like Trump think I'm an itinerant lefty, and all the people who think I like Trump think I'm like some right-wing person, and I'm actually neither. I literally could not give a shit. But it is interesting. Charlie Higson's viewpoint is a very, very narrow viewpoint, which is fine because I think if you thought about James Bond as a character and you thought about what he would be like living in 2023 as opposed to the 1960s, I imagine his viewpoint would probably be something along those lines. I think James Bond would look at Andrew Tate and think he's a wanker, and probably think no more about him. And I think he would look at I think he would look at a figure like Donald Trump with disdain. I think he would think Donald Trump is kind of vulgar and populist. I don't think he would buy into the whole thing of like, oh, he's the next Hitler. And so I think, yeah, James Bond as a character is probably a little right of centre rather than left of centre or left wing. But overall, I didn't really mind that much because I enjoyed reading this book, putting James Bond into the world of 2023 and observing real life things that occurred through that lens, because the Ian Fleming books are absolutely about that. That's one of the reasons I was so upset when the Ian Fleming publications decided to censor the original James Bond books, because so much of what makes them of literary significance is the fact that Ian Fleming gives us observations about things from his particular perspective, which is a very international, upper middle class British person. And throughout the books, there are little comments that he makes politically, but he doesn't really express any political viewpoints himself. They're all observations. And that's when I started thinking about whether this book is woke or not, I realized that Charlie Higson was essentially doing the same thing. The bit that people highlight as like, when the bad guy Ethelston brings together his group of people and James Bond observes that they don't have a 50-50 ratio of men and women and they're all white and there aren't any people of color in there and no disabled people. And that's not really woke, and that's not really James Bond being like, oh, I can't believe they're organising a coup and don't have 50% representation of women. Where are the people of colour? What kind of revolutionary person are you? It's an observation, not a commentary. And I think it's very much in keeping with how Ian Fleming wrote. And I think that when you actually read the book and give it some thought, that's what Charlie Higson does. There is no real political preaching in this book. He just observes things and observe things through a particular viewpoint. And I enjoy that. I think that's what makes this book significant. 50 years down the line, when people are reading this, they'll get a viewpoint into a world in which, any group of people who get together, there's going to be somebody who's like, oh, there's 50% representation of women. Are there enough people of color here? It's like, in 50 years' time, is that going to be this absurd fad that went on in the first quarter of the 21st century, or I don't know, or it's really interesting. The world is changing, and our cultural sensibilities and understanding of things are changing constantly. Ian Fleming's world of the 50s and 60s is very different to Charlie Higson's world of 2023, and in the future, books like this will allow a viewpoint into a time that no longer exists. And that's why I kind of enjoy the little political observations that go in there. And they are observations. I really believe that. I don't think Charlie Higson is trying to preach anything. And if he is, I have some certain sympathy to it. It's like, he based a character on Andrew Tate. Some people support Andrew Tate. Some people don't believe he's guilty of these things. I think Andrew Tate is a wanker. So I think it's delightful to read a character based on Andrew Tate who ends up dying from a face full of paprika. Spoiler alert, but read the book. Yeah. I don't know. I like those things. It added a bit of zest. And I think it was one of the reasons why I found this book so refreshing. I love the Anthony Horowitz books. I love them being period continuation novels. However, the original James Bond books were contemporary books, and I think that's something that's missing. Raymond Benson did that with 0-10, was set around the time Hong Kong got handed back to the Chinese. This book is written in 2023, the era of Donald Trump. I mean, it's nice to have James Bond operating in a contemporary world, and I think, as much as many of us are like, oh, they should make a period James Bond, it's like, no, I think James Bond is always contemporary. Even in the movies, you watch, Live and Let Die was a blaxploitation movie. You had Moonraker, which is a Star Wars movie. The Quantum of Solace was basically a Jason Bourne movie. Wasn't it weird? Quantum of Solace ripped off Jason Bourne, which ripped off James Bond. It's like this weird loop. But even the Bond films themselves are always achingly contemporary. And yeah, I think a contemporary James Bond is the way to go. So yeah, I don't think Charlie Higson was politically motivated in this book, or if he was, it carried on with a certain authenticity that I liked. And the more I follow Charlie Higson actually now on Twitter, and yeah, you can absolutely see that he's the sort of person who has the thoughts he does. And to me, I find it kind of entertaining, and I do observe the fact that Charlie Higson and so many British people are very tunnel visioned about James Bond and figures in a broader spectrum, the global spectrum. But at the end of the day, isn't that what James Bond is all about? Isn't that what James Bond is all about? They were books written in the declining days of the British Empire, where colonialism still existed, and Ian Fleming, through the voice of James Bond, had a very narrow particular view of Britain and its place in the world. And Charlie Higson is giving us a very narrow view of Britain and its place in the world, and I think that is entirely appropriate, and I enjoy it, and I'm there for it. I really do think this book was a triumph for Ian Fleming Publications, and I love having discussions like this. It makes me just enjoy the whole thing more. Anyway, that's my thought on it. Let me know down in the comments section below whether you agree with me or not. I would be really interested to hear your thoughts, especially if you do think this book was getting too political, if you think there is or isn't space for that in the James Bond universe. Yeah, I would love to know your thoughts. So, till then, I will be back with another video very soon. Bye. I'm Roland Hume. I've sold 67,000 copies of my books. If you want to find out how I did it, I've got a link right here you can click. And otherwise, don't forget to subscribe. I've got more videos coming soon. Thank you.